Great. As Don mentioned, my name is Creed Caldwell. I'm a parishioner here. It's my pleasure to speak to you this morning about Archbishop John Wester's pastoral letter titled Living in the Light of Christ's Peace, a Conversation Toward Nuclear Disarmament. So to start, I would like to share a video with you. This is from Carl Sagan's Cosmos, and he's reflecting on an image that was returned to Earth from the Voyager 1 probe. And it was the image I had up a second ago. I don't know if you could see it, but it was a image of the Earth that's just this tiny little dot, and there's a beam of light sort of across it. So I hope you can all hear this recording. Can you hear? No? Okay. I can just read it. I brought the text of it. Oh.
Next to you.
I think it was coming out here.
Yeah, we'd have to change the source, so it's easier at this point just to wherever it's coming.
I can just read it. That's fine. No worries, no worries. You can see the image, so that's Earth. So these are the words of Carl Sagan. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering. Thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilizations, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely indistinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, our delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. So I chose this clip from Carl Sagan because I think it is poetic and peaceful and appeals to the best in all of us. He speaks out against the self-destruction of humanity, and he does it without appealing to any specific religion or tradition. He just holds up a mirror to our planet and invites us to get a little perspective. My challenge to you is, if Carl Sagan, a scientist, can do all that just by talking about science, where are all of the voices doing the same thing, but from the beautiful and nonviolent tradition of Jesus? Today, we're going to talk about an important letter that invites all of us to lift up our voices of nonviolence. On January 11th of this year, Archbishop John Wester of Santa Fe published a pastoral letter called Living in the Light of Christ's Peace, a conversation toward nuclear disarmament. The letter was released before the war in Ukraine began, and my presentation was drafted before that as well. I'll mention it later, but overall, I think these truths are merely thrown into sharper relief and not at all changed as a result of the war crimes and nuclear intimidation by Vladimir Putin. I invite all of you to hold this in your minds and your hearts as we explore the topic. Archbishop Wester starts his letter with a story about when he visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki. From the ruins, we know that when the bombs dropped, there were children in school who saw a bright light and ran toward the windows to see what it was, and were then incinerated where they stood. As horrifying as he found this, upon returning to Santa Fe, the next day he went on a tour of Los Alamos and saw exhibits that celebrated what a wonderful thing the Manhattan Project was, how it ended World War II and brought peace to the world. Archbishop Wester's thesis throughout his letter is that we are called to be the light of Christ to the world. But we, as the builders, owners, and users of nuclear weapons, promote the false light of violence. Let's start, as the letter does, with a review of the word nonviolence. People hear the word nonviolence and think of the nice, peaceful Jesus with a lamb over his shoulders and kids around his feet. But that's not the whole story. Nonviolence is not just about being capital N nice. It is an active, non-retaliatory stance of resistance against the forces of violence in our world. Being nonviolent means refusing to cooperate with violence. And let's face it, in our world, violence is baked into our everyday life. It's part of our economy, it's part of our politics, it's part of our government. So in what ways was Jesus actively nonviolent? You don't have to look far to find examples. He told his followers, "Love your enemies." When a woman was about to be stoned for adultery, he said, let the one among you who is without sin cast the first stone." He offered a complete reversal of violence by suggesting that we turn the other cheek. When his disciples rushed to defend him from arrest, he said, "Peter, put away your sword." Finally, he was crucified without a word of resistance or complaint and triumphed over violence in the resurrection. Then he returned to those who abandoned him in his moment of need, not as a ghost bent on haunting them or revenge, but with the words, "Peace be with you." Next, we review how Pope Francis and our bishops have been calling for disarmament for many years. Here's a quote directly from the letter. "For many decades now, the Church has condemned nuclear weapons and the threat of nuclear war. Support for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation is solidly rooted in Catholic social teaching on war and peace, and has been emphasized by Pope St. John the 23rd, the documents of Vatican II, Pope St. Paul VI, Pope St. John Paul II, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, and most recently, our current Holy Father, Pope Francis. In addition, the US bishops have advocated for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, end quote. You probably don't hear it very frequently, but Martin Luther King Jr. was also strongly nonviolent and anti-nuclear proliferation. But even if it wasn't promoted by the church, it is obvious from the Gospels what Jesus would say to us today. When the disciples asked Jesus if they should call down fire on the Samaritans, their sworn cultural and political enemies, he rebuked them with obvious disgust and moved on. Archbishop Wester says, if Jesus rebuked James and John for wanting to call down fire from heaven, he certainly rebukes us for having done it and preparing to do it again. We've established that nuclear weapons are violent by their very existence, not just in their use. Simply by living in this country and paying taxes, you and I are complicit. In what ways? Let's explore why this is a crisis of safety, environment, health, economy, and justice. This is a safety issue. There is a new arms race currently underway to modernize our weapons. Time and time again, accidental nuclear annihilation due to miscommunication, technical malfunction, has been averted by a single level-headed individual, or even a disobedient officer. Archbishop Wester highlights a number of these near misses in his letter. How long can luck and cool heads prevail? This is an environmental issue. Uranium mining has led to some 1,000 deaths in the US from lung cancer, disproportionately affecting Native Americans. To this day, abandoned mines continue to dangerously contaminate native land. This is a health issue. Over 130,000 nuclear workers or their families have filed claims due to radiation and chemical exposure. Fallout from nuclear weapons is estimated to have caused up to 430,000 cancer deaths worldwide between 1945 and 2000. That figure is expected to rise to up to 2.4 million due to long-term fallout. This is an economic issue. The US has invested more than $10 trillion, with an additional $1.7 trillion reinvested in modernization over the next 30 years. Imagine how easy it would be for Congress to set the budget if they didn't have $2 trillion of defense spending hanging over their heads. Yet it continues to be one of the only bipartisan spending efforts, with universal support from both Republicans and Democrats. How sad that in the face of global climate and pandemic disasters, the only thing our political parties can agree on is getting ready to bomb ourselves out of existence. This is a justice issue. The economic, technical, and climate impact of the new arms race disproportionately affects the poor, drives refugees from their homelands, and leaves developing countries to face unspeakable health and safety problems with no assistance from the so-called developed world. As followers of the nonviolent Jesus, we are called to resist falsehood and spread the light of truth. You will often hear politicians and businesses fear-mongering in order to drum up support for nuclear weapons. Here are some of the lies they tell. Deterrence is necessary. It's not violent if we just have them. They create jobs. There's no safe path to disarmament. As you can probably imagine, all of these are false. First of all, nuclear deterrence is demonstrably ineffective. Just turn on the news. The theory of deterrence, some have argued, was invented in the 50s to retroactively justify why we dropped the bombs when it was already known that Japan was ready to surrender. Second, we've seen from Pope Francis and others that the very existence of these devices is a collective sin and implicates all of us. Archbishop Wester counters the third lie here by pointing out that New Mexico has actually struggled economically due to the colonialist, environmental, and health fallout of the Los Alamos and Sandia labs. What's more, what wealth has been generated by these programs has been concentrated in a very small geographic and social sphere of elites, not used for the enrichment of jobs or community. Native Americans in New Mexico continue to see their land destroyed, while their white neighbors live in shameful excess. Finally, the world does have a path toward nuclear disarmament, which the Archbishop outlines. Who here knows what the TPNW is? Anybody? The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons has largely been ignored in our country. It went into effect on January 22nd, 2021, and is the first legally binding international ban on nuclear weapons, with total elimination as an end goal. The Vatican was the first nation-state to sign the treaty, all the way back in 2017. We Catholics should be the first on board with this important treaty, yet most of us have never even heard of it. We, the human race, not just the United States, have the technology to see when nuclear weapons are being developed or tested. So mutual accountability is indeed possible under this treaty. Here's a quote, and I wonder if anybody can identify where it's from. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed. Eisenhower. Yeah. As you can see, the truths of nonviolence counter the lies of the violent world. But we must shine the true light of nonviolence out into the darkness. And Jesus has your back. The letter concludes with a call to action. Here are a few items that we're asking everyone in this room to do. Read the letter for yourself. I included a hyperlink, and I will make sure that the PowerPoint is available afterward. If you don't have internet or can't get into the presentation, come talk to me, and I will print you a copy. You can support Archbishop Wester for his courageous and countercultural stand. Share the news with your friends, your family, most importantly, your bishop and your congresspeople. We have downstairs, after I'm done, blank stationery and pre-written letters. All you have to do is sign your name. We've got the addresses there, and we'll be there to answer any questions. If you're interested in pursuing more action, check out page 42 of the letter. He outlines a number of additional steps you can take to support nuclear disarmament. Finally, In light of all this, I ask you to once again consider the situation in Ukraine. And the only thing I have to add is this question. Do you trust Vladimir Putin with your life? How about your children's lives? Your grandchildren? The sad truth is, it doesn't matter if you trust him. He has the power to end every one of our lives. The only way to take that power away from him is to take it away from everyone. But with God, all things are possible. Thank you for your time, and I'll join you downstairs to write some letters. Thank you. If there are any questions, I think we have a few minutes before we can go down